Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for the lovely introduction. Julie and I will talk today about an area of law that I am super excited about and I feel like doesn't necessarily always get the attention that it deserves in the AI governance toolkit, and this is tort law. So today we will talk about what tort law is and why it's super important for AI agents in our AI governance toolkit. We will touch upon some of the key concepts in tort law, and also already apologies to all the lawyers in the room. This will be super quick and probably won't do justice to the beauty and complexities of liability law. We will quickly touch on the current state of liability in the EU, but also UK and the US, and then talk about kind of what are the key challenges that AI agents pose for liability. And one of that is, of course, the notion of control, the autonomy that AI agents have. And this was not the first time that policymakers had to grapple with these kind of challenges. So we will look into a case studies, the UK Autonomous Vehicles Act, and Julia will explain kind of the lessons we can take from that, the mechanisms that they have employed to grapple with a technology that is autonomous. And then lastly, we will apply this to AI agents and propose levels of autonomy that could serve as a structured lens through which we can investigate liability claims. So what is tort law and why should we care about it? Super simply put, tort law is kind of about the legal responsibility that a person or a company holds for an action that they take or fail to take that then leads to some kind of harm. Yeah, super basic description. Importantly, there is you don't need to have kind of a contract between these two parties or some specific law in place. And given that, there's a bunch of different features that make liability actually a really nice tool. More than that are listed here, and also we'll just quickly touch upon a few of those. But one thing I really am excited about tort law is that it already works now. We don't have to wait for a specific law to be passed. We don't have to wait for the August 2026 deadline to start enforcement. So that's kind of really nice, and it also applies in the US and the UK. Speaking of enforcement, the next really nice thing about tort law is that it kind of opens up another pool of actors that can hold companies accountable for their actions. So in the EU, we have this AI Act right now, which is super exciting, an AI office that will hopefully take a lot of cases on. But with tort law, we also have private actors that, in case there's some kind of harm, they can take legal action against the company. And so it kind of widens and this pool of people who can hold companies accountable. Yeah, so many more, and I feel like I'm already running out of time. But TLDR is that liability can be a really nice complement to ex-ante regulation. It scales kind of with the risks. People that are worried about the AI Act or the Code of Practice becoming outdated at some point, which I don't necessarily believe, because a lot of the chairs did an amazing job in having a lot of flexibility and future-proofing in the code. But with liability, your standard is always kind of what is the state of the art right now, and did someone follow that? Yeah, so kind of the next question that arises is like, okay, what are the most common routes to liability? And this is where I'm really worried speaking in front of a bunch of lawyers today. But there's three kind of main standards. We just wanted to quickly touch on negligence, so fault-based liability, strict liability, and product liability. The first one, fault-based liability, is usually kind of the default across jurisdictions, but also in different areas. So without basically a specific statute or law in place, actors can be held accountable if they fail to take their duty of care that a reasonable actor would have taken. So, for example, if they didn't adhere to some state-of-the-art risk assessment approaches, they can be held accountable if someone can show that there is a link between their actions and the harm that was caused. Two other concepts, strict liability and product liability. So strict liability, you don't necessarily have to show that an actor acted in a negligent way. This is usually reserved for like inherently dangerous activities. So for example, if you store chemicals, even if you put in some safety safeguards, you can be held accountable. But this usually requires some specific statutes. Similar for product liability, if a manufacturer puts out a product, they can be held accountable if some damage occurs. So what does liability look like right now? What is the current state of the affairs? Without going into too much detail, we have these like 3 jurisdictions here in the EU. Quite recently, the EU product liability was updated, and they clarified that AI systems and software are specifically in scope of the product liability directive. Also in recent news, the AI liability directive, this proposal was withdrawn. This would have made it easier to bring in a claim and to remedy harm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no liability applying in the EU. It just means that we have 27 different laws in the member states, and there's not this basic harmonization. Also for the UK and the US, who are under this common law regime, just want to quickly mention that for none of those, there's some specific explicit liability shields. There are of course discussions, but as of now, broadly across all of these jurisdictions, usually negligence applies. So, as Catherine promised, we will also talk a little bit about agents. What are agents? We understand them basically as systems that can take independent actions in the world, that can plan and carry out a sequence of actions. One of the really nice features is basically that they can engage with the environment, take some lofty goals that you give them that are sometimes super unspecified. For example, when I talk to chat, and it just gets what I actually mean, and take action on that. This is super exciting and makes it a really useful tool. At the same time, of course, it means it poses some challenges to liability. Specifically, how foreseeable is the harm, and how can control be exercised? So one key issue, if you look at this left figure about how an agent works, this is an example workflow. What we can already see is that there's a lot of actors involved in the workflow of an AI agent. You have the user who does something, gives a goal, a prompt. You have a foundational model provider who provides the motor or the engine of the agent. Some company or a bunch of companies building scaffolding around it so it can take action. You have the environment in which it interacts. And so it might be often a bit tricky to say which kind of actor can be held reliable, accountable, or who took which action. This becomes even more challenging if you have a lot of different agents interacting with each other, and if you don't have clear mechanism to provide visibility into their actions. At the same time, another question that opens up is how foreseeable is really the harm. So AI agents are might be, because of their generality, not necessarily, they don't necessarily take deterministic actions. You don't tell them or program them to do X, Y, Z, but they actually can interpret it themselves and go out in the world and do things. And so then again, really challenging notion, what is actually the thing that caused the harm? was it actually foreseeable? Who can be held accountable? A lot of these questions kind of center around this notion: who has the control? And so, yeah, passing it off to Julia, who will talk about AV regulation in the UK, where they actually kind of grappled with a very similar question: what do you do? How does liability change when control diminishes?
Okay. Basically faced with this question around, okay, we have agents that are potentially quite autonomous, they might be difficult to control, but there also is a lot of debate about, I think recently the term AI agent has become kind of conflated with a lot of different things, right? Because agents have already existed within computer science actually for quite a long time. It's just now we consider them to be something different because we put foundation models into the mix. And a lot of AI companies are creating a lot of hype around them and basically pushing them to become more and more autonomous, although we're not quite there yet technologically. And so basically we wanted to create a framework that would help differentiate between different kinds of agents, which might be helpful in establishing sort of what the levels of control are that a user and developer can exercise at those different levels of autonomy. And that also might potentially be helpful, basically so that people know what kind of agent they are using and how autonomous it is, and therefore maybe what kinds of control they can exercise and how risky it is to use that agent in a certain setting. So basically what I said, not all agents are equal, so we wanted to differentiate between them, and which actors can take and should be expected to take, what kind of reasonable precautions, and that kind of ties back in with that liability question of like, usually within negligence or fault-based liability, it's a question of who should have taken a reasonable precaution at a certain time, who was in a position to have prevented that harm from happening. But in order to understand that, we do need to know what is actually the range of control someone has. So we try to create a framework for this and also basically ask, okay, maybe is there also a scenario where if we try to map out, okay, this is the kind of control the developer has, this is the kind of control that the user might have, is there also do we eventually get to a level of sort of autonomy and capability where we actually think neither can really effectively control what the agent does, which might lead us to a situation where you can ask about the desirability of having agents like that sort of being marketed or people choosing to use those agents. So then it's kind of like, okay, maybe we get to the point where an agent is like actually not controllable. So like, do we want to have that? And is there maybe some other solutions there around like strict liability that we might want to explore? So basically also the question of like what we do when an agent like really becomes like ungovernable, what if you don't want to do it anymore. Okay, so to kind of like help our thinking in this, because I was like, how am I ever going to do this and actually deal with this, because it's kind of a big question. I don't have a technical background. So as a lawyer, I of course look at other legal frameworks that already exist. And it turns out the UK in 2024 passed the UK Autonomous Vehicles Act. And autonomous vehicles are, of course, not perfectly analogous to AI agents. They have a more limited range of like where they can operate the road versus the web. But still, we thought, okay, it could be interesting to kind of see what sort of approach was taken here and how those questions of control and responsibility and autonomy have kind of like worked in this legislative framework. And so AVs, for those who know, are categorized based on a sort of standard categorization of levels of autonomy. So if you get to the very start, level 1, it's basically just like cruise control, like it controls your speed. If you get to like a super high level of autonomy, basically the person sitting in the car has no control whatsoever over how the AV actually operates, steers, drives, accelerates, all of that. And this act was essentially passed because the UK foresaw that if you have these very autonomous vehicles on the road, then, but people at the same time can be held liable for simply sitting in a car that drives into someone, people might not want to sit in the car, right? So they basically created this framework that says that at the moment where the car is autonomous enough and this is being sort of exercised, it's active, then the person in the car will not be liable for damages that occur, but the liability is instead shifted upwards to the vehicle manufacturer. And there's also sort of a mandatory insurance scheme in place here, basically that ensures like a quick payout, but then like behind the scenes later on, there's going to be this shifting of the liability and who bears the costs. And also quite interestingly, there's a good like transparency regime that links to that, so that both means that someone who wants to put an AV on the market needs to provide certain information about how the vehicle works, what level of autonomy it has, and those kind of questions. And also, if an accident does take place, the developers must share data with insurers so the insurers can determine who should be paying out in the end. So this leads to quite some like interesting mechanisms around like linking liability to control, recognizing autonomy as a spectrum, all those kind of things. So mapping that onto AI agents, we try to sort of create a very rudimentary approach where we sort of took some guiding questions. So like the generality of an AI agent, so that's like in how many domains it can be used, the control, and access to tools and environments. So just to give some examples to kind of help you through these levels. At level 1, we get to an agent that probably under like sort of the current, how we might use the word AI agent, we probably wouldn't even really call it an agent because it's something that's very narrow, sort of rule-based kind of agent. So basically, it only controls, sort of automates a certain action, but it doesn't determine when you do it. And also the route is sort of pre-programmed by the developer. So think of something where you say, hey, turn off the light, and it turns off the light for you. So there's one route, the user determines when it happens, that's when it happens. So if you get to level 2, it's still kind of if-then, still kind of rule-based, but there's a little bit more planning involved because, for instance, the user might say, okay, if the temperature drops below a certain degree, turn off the temperature. So there's a sort of like recognizing the environment, responding to it, and then taking the action, but it's still like fairly predetermined, right? There's not a lot of space for movement, so this agent is still limited autonomy. Then when we get to level 3, we see that agents basically start to get access to more tools, so their environment becomes more open. So still the routes they have to impacting are a bit limited. I think this links back really nicely to the previous talk on affordances. And it's basically, so here there's some, I guess, affordances or tools that the agent has. Example could be, hey, plan a meeting with me with person X, and then the agent has access to both their calendars and then sees when everyone is available, puts in the meeting. So still there's some sort of like limited routes, and also the user, the control they have is essentially they can give the prompt, but they don't have to be too worried because like the agents, like it's very sort of limited space in which they can operate. Once we actually get to level 4, we start to get to the agents that I don't think we currently reliably have, but that AI companies are kind of working towards. So this is where the tool access becomes a lot more open. So there's multiple routes, a sort of more open-endedness to how certain goals can be achieved. So for instance, you might say, hey, agent, can you help me plan a meal plan for this like sort of health goal that I have? It plans out the meal plan for you. It then says like, okay, these are the kind of groceries you should do. And then maybe after also checking it, human oversight is being built in at various points. The user might okay that the groceries are being ordered and they put in their credit card info. Once you get to the very last level of autonomy, you see a sort of agent that also can do this multi-step kind of reasoning, but also that has much less opportunities for human oversight. So where the user is actually just kind of gives a goal, but the human oversight is sort of like quite limited. So there's less sort of points for check-in. And I guess maybe we could at some point get to a point where you actually give your credit card to an agent. I don't know if I support that, but that could be a kind of point where you end up at. But at this point, it might be very, very hard to effectively control the agent. So here you really would have to, either the developer has to really be very confident that they can make the agent reliable enough that even with those limited points of human oversight, they can still sort of guide the agent towards responsible behavior. But otherwise, you really might want to consider having some kind of strict liability regime. So basically, these levels of autonomy are supposed to help. So more or less when autonomy expands and the control diminishes for the user, liability might be shifting to the entity that provides the autonomous capability. So at some point, the way the agent acts is less reliant on sort of like the oversight that the user exercises, and it's more dependent on how the developer might be programming the agent to work and like what kind of affordances and tools it builds in. And so basically, if the developer does not think they can make that agent work reliably, you might want to build in more oversight and less tools. So viewing agents on an autonomy spectrum might help situate them within a broader context of technological development, might help raising questions around control, and maybe if you want to create a less autonomous agent simply because it means we can control it better and therefore have better rules around responsibility. And the limitation of that would be maybe we get to a point where we cannot really control this anymore. So maybe you just want to not have this kind of agents until we get to a level of technological development where we feel comfortable. Still, there's lots of open questions around this framework, and this was a very quick overview, and I went way over time, so I hope this was somewhat helpful in explaining the framework, but please do ask questions, and also, yeah, there's lots of still open things here.